one person's opinion of what makes a good account leader. And the discussion was around, you have to be almost the architect, the general contractor. I think I made the point, the general contractor that understands what the house will look like when it's done. And thus, all the people and the components and the products and the solutions that have to be brought to bear to complete that house. And so with that analogy, a good account leader, from our perspective, for our clients, is that individual that sees the breadth of possibility around solutions and products and services, and knows who and when and how to bring in that team, that expert, that consultant, that analytic person, together or individually for the client. That's ultimately what this person does. It's almost the orchestrator, if you will. And that is a new skill that we're trying to create. We don't have that in abundance today. We have it with some of our clients. This whole notion about teaming up different sets of skills and competencies so that you have that inspirational consultant who can come in and talk to the client about the macro trends, the C-level stuff, the big insights, but at the same time have that deeply analytic subject matter expert who's usually a little bit in the background, perhaps a bit introverted, but brings the credibility, brings that domain expertise, so that the client doesn't think that he or she's just getting sort of snowed over by the consultant with all the big stuff. So I think that's what, from my perspective, what an account leader has to do. It sounds easy, it's really hard to do. A bad account manager, someone who I think is territorial, who doesn't look across his own organization to see the full breadth of capabilities that can be brought to bear for that client. And by that I mean someone who may be incented just to bring a specific solution. He or she has to think beyond that, even if the incentive plan may not be perfectly aligned. And I've got to tell you, having worked with incentive plans for many, many years, there's never a completely perfect incentive plan. So somebody that understands the full breadth, someone who I think who is interested in really getting deep into the client need and understanding. Again, it's the sense of timing, knowing when it's right. Said simply, it's the opposite of all the things I just said that you needed, right? I mean, that's the simple answer. But I think being very narrow, not willing to push for change, not being a change agent and looking for new possibilities. Most importantly, probably not setting up the client for his or her success. At the end of the day, what our account leader has to do with our clients is make them look even better than they already are. And if an account leader can't do that and will actually make that person perhaps look bad, that's not the DNA that we want for our account leaders. Well, it's hard to go from bad to great. I think you can go from bad to better to good and maybe to great. So it really depends on where on the scale you are. We have competencies that we have baked into our performance management system, so obviously we'll use those, and those competencies just aren't generic things like innovation, thought leadership, strategic, who even knows what that is. What we've done is taken those competencies and define them behaviorally, so it's easy for someone to see the gaps. So that's one way that we really refer back over and over to those competencies to make sure from a behavioral sense they understand what's expected of them. Coaching, mentoring, all that stuff is extremely important. And then we give people time to practice those new skills. Again, clarity about what's expected through competencies, which is how I do the job, and then what is expected of them through something we call a balanced scorecard. Very specific results, which is what we need from them. So it's the what and the how. And coaching, and I'm not going to sit and say we've got all of our leaders are great coaches. It's one of the things that we're trying to work with our leaders on is making them better coaches in order to obviously develop their people. So we identify every year our top 10% of the organization. We spend a lot of time with that group, call them high potentials, future leaders, whatever you want. And we put them on accelerated career paths because that's where we really have to invest given our lack of resources to do a lot more. The bottom 10% we try to make better. If it doesn't work, we'll redeploy them elsewhere. And then the middle of the pack, which is most of us, is incrementally moving them from good to better to better. Sometimes great. Most companies have a lot of online learning classes in a massive library of offerings. You buy these things off the shelf, there's hundreds of programs. Like Skillsoft, right? And so then the question is, how do you know what your people are taking? Because they have access to any of these things. And we have the opportunity to go in and see who's taking what class. And I was referring to the fact that we saw that some of our people were taking great classes. Unfortunately, those classes had nothing to do with our business. On the other hand, learning a foreign language, not a terrible thing, particularly as we're trying to penetrate some new geographies in the world.